If everything feels urgent, your team is living in a constant stress response. Now, you might call it high standards or fast pace or a culture of excellence, but the outcome is usually the same. We see burnout, we see conflict, and we also see mistakes that get made. I'm Kristen Wilson, and for the last 17 years, I've been helping organizations build psychologically safe and trust-rich teams that remain strong even under pressure. In this video, I'm going to explain why urgency becomes the default when it shouldn't, and what it does to your team's brain and your team's culture. And I'm going to share the specific leadership shifts that you need to make so that urgency is the exception and not the rule. Now, psychological safety and trust are 2 of the 12 elements of a great company culture, and you can find all 12 in my free Build a Great Company Culture Guide, and that's linked in the description. So first one I want to talk about is that urgency is often a reaction to how we manage or don't manage, but it's not really a situation, meaning very few things are urgent. Now, I'm not sure where everyone works, but I will tell you that it's not all the ER. So urgency is something that we have to not make an adjective of how our organizations and our culture runs. Let me give you an example. A client once told me, Krista, all this urgency, it's kind of hectic right now, but we're just in a busy season. And that's after I was talking to staff who reported over and over and over how they just felt so burnt out. They were tired, they were skipping lunches, they were not taking lunch breaks, they weren't using the restroom when they knew that they needed. And this season that they were in had been going on for 3 years. And what that means is this sense of urgency where everything has to get done right now. It becomes your team or your company or your organization's, its operating system. Urgency begins to shift and guide how you make decisions, how you interact or not. And urgency becomes how you operate when you see these things. You might see that priorities are unclear or there's competing priorities. Perhaps what you see is that roles are unclear as well. We often see that decisions get delayed because leaders are waiting for perfect information. And by the way, that rarely comes. And so when decisions get delayed, that just creates this sense of lack of clarity and it creates that sense of urgency. And when we do that, everything becomes a last minute scramble, trying to get everything done, try to figure it out. And so we're in this constant state of hustle. And so what happens is, as opposed to people going at a moderate jog, just trying to keep the pace of the work, they start sprinting by default, knowing that they've got to move fast and they've got to move at this frenetic pace, just trying to catch up. But oftentimes they can't catch up. It's almost like there's a race with no finish line. They're just running at this fast pace. Even though I know friends that are ultra marathoners, I will tell you that you get tired. Like at some point, you got to stop. And so stopping looks like burnout. It looks like disengagement. It looks like burnout and turnover, or what we see a lot with our clients. The second thing I want to lift up as we think about how pressure is showing up and the sense of urgency is that when we are operating in this chronic, consistent state of urgency, it breaks our focus, but it also breaks relationships and the quality we work and the quality of our relationships. There's a real cost of urgency. What I like to think about is when urgency is constant, right? It's this constant frenetic pacing of the work. People stop thinking long-term. Our team members are not thinking about the bigger picture or the vision. They're just trying to get through this moment because that's all that their nervous systems can hold. And what that means is the small issues that we may see come up that need to get tended to, they don't get tended to. And the smaller things that break, they don't get repaired. Why? Because we're so focused on the things that seem urgent. And oftentimes those reparative tasks don't meet the definition of urgent. That leads to people getting a little short with each other, right? We see grace start to disappear. Patience starts to disappear. Communication gets sharp. It doesn't feel good sometimes when we talk to folks because they're so pressed for time. They're so stretched thin that they're not thinking about the impact of the words of their actions. Or rather, they're not thinking about the impact of their words and actions. What we often find is that teams are then becoming more tense. The culture becomes more tense. And then the team becomes reactive. So they're just constantly reacting to what's coming their way as opposed to being able to be more strategic. Strategic means being analytical, having better discernment, making the right choices for the long-term vision of the team and of the organization. We can't do that when the pace is so fast. We're just reacting one thing after another. And here's a hard truth. My clients know that we're always talking about, tell the truth, tell the hard truth. Here's the hard truth about this. Sometimes urgency can feel productive, especially for high performers. Does anybody watching this consider themselves a high performer or a hyperachiever? I'm a hyperachiever myself. And I will tell you that sometimes that urgency provides a dopamine hit. We say we don't want to be urgent. We don't want to be in this frenetic, kind of hectic, fast pace. But for some of us, it does give us that feel good hormone, a feel good vibe. And so there's sometimes an addictiveness, an addictive nature to that sense of urgency. But I want to heed you that it's not an addiction that you want to build. It actually starts to steal your sustainability, the team sustainability, and it definitely steals well-being. I know so many hyperachievers, reformed hyperachievers, high performers who are recovering from burnout because everything was urgent. They pushed. Cortisol went high, and then they just broke. This is the third thing I want to share with you. The thing that leaders often get wrong are these common mistakes when it comes to feel this pressure. Oftentimes, leaders and team members too, they think that urgency, when you are being urgent, you're being responsive, you're staying late, you're answering every email immediately, that it shows that you're committed to the work. I know when I was an employee, we were rewarded when we stayed late and we worked weekends. We were always on call on our cell phones because everything was important and urgent. We were rewarded for that because I think organizations and even some leaders see that you're super committed to your job, but that's actually not true, right? It just shows that we're getting caught up in a hustle culture. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't mean that people should, slack off, but I think that there's not that extreme where it's either you're slacking off or everything's urgent and important. And so that's a kind of a culture that we try to build inside of our clients. So here's another common mistake that we see when leaders look at the urgency and how their team members demonstrate urgency. They reward those who become the poster children for overwork, for being on call and always being available. And then people who establish their boundaries get punished. So here's an example. We did an employee focus group for a client a couple of years ago. And one of those people shared that for their own well-being, they needed to stop work at 5:30. Now, in their employee contract, they are, required to be on the clock from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And so they said, I give an extra half hour most days of the week, but I can't be working till 9 at night and expected to start my day at 7 a.m. because that's the nature of the work, because that's not what I was contracted to do. They will establish and set up boundaries. Oftentimes, not every time, but many times when employees create those boundaries around schedule, around urgency, they get in trouble. They get punished. Right? I can think of another example where this was not part of their job description. It's not part of the express expectations of a role. And a director was reprimanded because they didn't answer texts over the weekend. And what they shared was that for me, weekends are for family. It's for rest. It's a time to disconnect from work and to live my life. And when the person said this, they established their boundary. Their commitment to the work, their commitment to the job was questioned. And so they noticed that there was some retaliation after they established that boundary. So this is something that I think as a culture, we've got to fix. That urgency, always being on call, always being available means that you're committed to the job, because that's creating the kind of burnout that people say they don't want, but exists. Now, here's something else that we see. Leaders often confuse when people are speedy. So they respond to every email fast. They respond to every Slack fast. They confuse it for people being clear, that they understand kind of the context of the decisions or the work. But speedy responses does not mean folks are clear or they're being strategic. It just means that they may be speaking to that culture of urgency that they feel they have to respond immediate. And here's the last one I want to mention here. Almost 20 years of consulting, working with, thousands and thousands of leaders. One thing I have consistently heard across sectors, across role is, well, we will fix all of these issues about workload, role clarity, etc., when things just calm down. If you've ever heard that, when things just calm down, comment calm, just so I can see if there's any folks who have heard that. But here's the thing. If we wait for calm to come, if we wait for calm before we start to fix the broken culture of urgency and address all the things putting pressure on our people, we'll probably never do it. So we want to be finding micro moments to release the pressure that's on our team and not wait for the slowdown period, because so often that doesn't come. We know that if you wait for the calm, things may not get better. But what you can do is steal a few moments here and there to design your culture, your policies, and your practices to help alleviate that pressure while folks are under the pressure. So as I think about all of these things, I want to share, so what can you do about it? Oftentimes when we work with managers and middle managers, they will often say, well, I am not the chief of the institution. I don't set directives in terms of our shareholder commitments, right? Or, our board commitments. And so they may feel in a way powerless to address the way that urgency is showing up in their team culture. And so I want to share with you some leadership moves that can reduce urgency fast. In other words, to try to figure out how to make urgency rare. If you think about, you go to the hospital, right? They have, at my hospital where I live, there's the hospital where the emergency room is. There's a part of the hospital that is where the doctor's offices are. And then there's urgent care. You don't go to urgent care all the time. You go to urgent care when I need something addressed right now, because if I don't, I'm scared of what could happen. Same thing with the emergency room. Most people aren't going to the emergency room or urgent care, more than maybe once a year. You're not going once a week. You're not going twice or 5 times a week. So when I talk about this idea of make urgency rare, I want to use that example. And I want to think about what our doctor's offices are. It's preventative care. So that's the invitation for leaders, is to try to figure out what are the preventative steps, measures, and care practices that you can embed so that we can reduce the sense of urgency. So let me share some ideas. The first is create a shared definition of urgent. What is urgent? I always say we need to be clear, and this comes from, years of research. You may have heard of the Eisenhower matrix, but it's this idea that not everything is important and not everything is a high priority. So if you don't have a definition of what urgent is, if you tell your team members that I need this and it's really important and it's urgent, is that definition understood across the team and even between you and the person who you've just allocated an urgent task to? I think of urgent being something that's time sensitive, it's high consequence, and it cannot be delayed. And I want you to notice what that will do right away when you create this shared language. It's going to actually help you clarify and separate what's a real fire and what's just this anxious noise that is showing up in your to-do list and in your team's to-do list. Now, I mentioned this a moment ago, but if you want a simple tool to help your team or you sort out what's important and what's urgent in real time, that framework is called the Eisenhower matrix, or the urgent and important matrix. It's a cool tool where you look at your to-do list and then I like to use a drag and drop because I'm very tactile in how I work, but just to drag those tasks and really discern, is it important? Is it high priority? Or is it really low stakes? Or this is something that could be delegated or just deleted. So it's a really great visual tool to help you finish that. Now, I can't teach this deeply in this video, but if you want a future episode with the tool about how to make things clear, whether they're urgent or important, just comment matrix and I'll create a tool for you and I'll create a video on it. Here's the second thing that you can do. Tell people what those trade-offs are and do it out loud. So if everything is a priority, then by default, nothing is. So you've got to make that trade-off visible. If I do this, it means I can't do this. Make that clear, because a pressure-proof leader doesn't just say yes to more things. I can do it. Yes, we could do that. I can do that. They're very clear and they verbalize, if we take this on, here's what we're not going to be able to do. Or you can ask the question, if we take this on, what are we not going to be able to do? Here's a third thing that you can do to alleviate pressure and really discern between urgency and low priority. Clarify your decision-making methodology. or a decision-making hierarchy? Who decides what tasks get done? Who decides what's urgent and what's important, what's low priority or high priority? Who decides when something has to be done by? And based on what information? These are all really good questions. I hope you wrote them down. A lot of the urgency that we see in our teams is created because decisions got delayed or there's been an unclear authority. It's not clear who can decide what or when. And so people then stall, the work stalls, and then once something gets flagged, hey, did you do this? I need it by 5 o'clock today. Then there's a scramble because at the onset of task delegation, we didn't actually flag the answers to all of those really important decisions. So do that. Here's a fourth thing that you can do. You can reduce the work that's currently in progress. So I bet you right now, if you looked at your project management system or your to-do list, and also looked at the to-do list or the project management boards of your team, I imagine that you would find there are too many active projects in play. And I'm guilty of this because I am, as I mentioned, I'm a reformed hyperachiever. So I know that I have the capacity to do a lot. And so it may mean that I have projects on my project management board that might generally take a week, but I'm trying to do it in 3 or 4 days because I think I can just push through it. Again, I'm a work in progress, but I don't put that same pressure on my team. And what I've noticed is often when I examine even my own to-do list and there's too many active projects. There's too many demands for our time. And that is what contributes to this sense of urgency because we see that long laundry list of stuff that we have to do. And so in order to push through and get all of that stuff done, we start skipping lunch or working late or working into the night or weekends. And so I want you to analyze what is the work in progress. I want you to consider, is there something that could be released? Because if there are just 1 or 2 fewer moving parts on their to-do list, it's going to help them become more steady. Now, I've heard from people, well, Krista, my entire team are high performers, and that's fine. But even a high capability or a high performing team, they can't juggle 19 priorities at once. And I guarantee you all 19 aren't priorities. So we need to have that discernment. Here's the 5th thing that you can do. You got to install predictable communication rhythms. So when people don't know when they'll get information, how clear the information will be, they often will be in like a sense of panic all day, checking in for answers and responses that may or may not be coming. When we can give people some level of predictability, it helps reduce pressure people are under. So that can look like giving clear updates. Hey, everyone, I just want to check in. We have this, high priority thing that has to get done on Friday. Is everyone clear of their role and they've reorganized their work plan to achieve this? Yes? No? Right? Just checking in. But if we're only updating folks when we're in an emergency, people will be living like on the edge in this constant state of fear, worry, anxiety. And we as leaders can alleviate that by just communicating on the front end about what we need, what's happening, and what the expectations are. So I want you to think about your team right now. Think about what they're working on, what you think is a high priority, what you think is urgent. Does your team have the same understanding? And what is your team's biggest urgency trigger right now, right? Meaning, what's the biggest thing that they have to get done or else something bad's going to happen? And do they know that? Maybe those triggers are there's unclear priorities. And so that's creating a sense of urgency. Maybe there's a lot of last minute requests. It's kind of become the culture. Or maybe there's just a constant state of change. Go ahead and comment what you feel like is creating urgency on your team right now. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Well, given all of that, I hope we've, helped at least give you one tactical thing that you could do right now to alleviate the pressure and the sense of urgency on your team. But if your team is working at a pace that feels urgent all the time, the next thing that you must do is check in with people's capacity. Do they have the time capacity or skill capacity to do what they're being asked to do? When we're in a constant state of urgency, we can start to create the things that we say we don't want on teams. We start to create disengagement and burnout and resentment. And so if you're noticing that, this idea of urgency and high priority is not a sometimes thing, but a regular or all the time kind of thing, it's telling you how your culture and how your work is designed. And even though it's currently designed for that urgency and priority and pressure, it doesn't have to be. You can actually start to do the redesign right now. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe that you can keep up with our work and conversations on workplace culture, team culture, and reducing the pressure that we're all under.